Greetings and welcome to Opinions. Opinions Now is a channel that allows people to express their opinions on matters relating to creativity. Today we have with us Martin Vengadesan, a person with a wide range of interests. I would say journalism, book writing, composition of music, production of music, and as well as playing music. So welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Rodin. Thanks for having me here.
You're most welcome. Before we're going to go into the details of your various subjects, can you give us a bit of a brief of your background, Martin?
Okay, I was born in Helsinki, Finland, primarily because my father is a Malaysian diplomat. And so I grew up in 9 countries around the world. I am now a journalist. I've been a journalist for the last 28 years, 23 years at the Star, and the last 5 years at Malaysia Kini.
That's regarding your journalism. Right. And then what actually motivated you or got you interested in journalism, Martin?
Okay.
Is there anything specific or you just one of those things where you grasp and you just came your way?
Yes, I think I almost fell into it by accident. I had basically two dominating interests, which were music and politics. And when I was a teenager, I was supposed to be an engineer. I actually had an engineering scholarship at Virginia Tech, but that didn't work out. I didn't focus enough at college, and I also was too drawn towards left-wing politics and also music. So I came back to Malaysia and tried my hand at being a full-time musician for more than 2 years, but it didn't really work out. So at some point, I moved into writing about music instead, and that has turned into a 28-year career in journalism.
So your foray into journalism was because of music. Am I right to say that?
Yes, it started off because I wanted to be a musician, and it wasn't working out, but I had enough background knowledge to write about music.
Write about music, okay. And then over the years, it has now gone into other areas as well. Your journalism that covers a lot of politics and current affairs.
Correct, that's right. When I first started in the mid-1990s, I was actually a music journalist for a weekly magazine, but now I'm an online news editor. So the move from print to digital is one aspect, and also from arts to news and politics.
Okay, Martin, let's not get too much into journalism and politics. Let's look at your creative side. And I understand that you've done 4 books, of which I've read 2. And you've also done 4 albums, right? I've listened to all 4 of them. Can you give us a little bit of background on why did you start writing books?
Okay, so regarding the books, one of the things I noticed was that in journalism, today your front page news, the next day you're the history already, you're part of history. So I decided that one of the best ways to capture a legacy and a time was through books. So again, the books represent very diverse interests. My very first book is about 42 of Malaysia's most famous crimes. And that's been quite best-selling, Malaysian Murders and Mysteries, which I wrote in collaboration with Andrew Sagayam, who's a crime journalist. So that was one aspect. Malaya 2057 is actually a completely different kind of work. It's a dystopian science fiction novel set in a future where the world is very different. It's actually devastated by climate change disaster as well as pandemics. And we are reduced to our baser instincts. The third book, which is called 101 Albums You Need to Hear Before I Die, is actually, it draws its inspiration from my career as a music journalist. And then also it delves into anecdotes as well as a lot of trivia about music.
So Martin, you wrote 3 books or 4 books?
3.
3 books, okay. Now, I found that it talks about the future very, very interesting. And usually when I read books on fiction, I'm trying to figure out the minds of the writer Of course, the story is very interesting. That gives you an insight into the book. But that really was stretching imagination a bit too far. So how did that happen?
Well, I set the framework for the story, and then I also use a stream of consciousness style. I actually wrote a lot of the novel in short bursts, very focused, and then I went back later and edited it. I realized that it has a disjointed narrative, a lot of flashbacks, and you don't always know which part of the book you're in, which point in time. But basically, I wanted to use it also to discuss a few philosophical issues, like secularism and materialism. So yes, I sometimes I use that platform
As
for
a
that.
springboard.
Yes, exactly. Springboard.
And that gives you more insight because at least you have a framework.
Correct. That's
Right?
right.
And from there you start imagining things.
Yes.
Of course, you're combining a little bit of facts as well,
Yes.
right? And so on. So yeah, that's a very interesting book as far as I'm concerned because I've read quite a bit of here from Indian writers, and I think I can easily say that it certainly stands out. So that is regarding that book. And then what made you write about the 101 albums?
Well, I have the most fun writing about music, I think. And so I have this large CD collection of a couple of thousand CDs. And I've also been very fascinated always with the stories behind the music. For example, the very first entry in my book is about Bessie Smith, who was a legendary blues singer who had a fatal car accident in the Deep South. And so there are lots of urban legends that grew up surrounding the circumstances of her death. There's also tales like Tim Buckley and son Jeff, and the story of Gloomy Sunday, which is a Hungarian song, which was believed to be playing in the background when a few people committed suicide in the 1930s. There's also that, plus my actual real-life interviews with a range of people from Carlos Santana, Phil Collins, members of Deep Purple, Uriah Heep, Jethro Tull, and so on.
Yeah. Martin, can you tell us a little bit about the interview with the group Uriah Heep?
Okay, sure. When Uriah Heep's Ken Hensley was one of my biggest songwriting idols, maybe in the early 1990s. I was fascinated by his style of keyboard playing and his songwriting. So he is somebody whom I got to interview twice, but we didn't meet directly. This one was through phone calls and email. The person I actually interviewed from Uriah Heep and met in person was Mick Box, the guitarist, because he brought his version of Uriah Heep down to Malaysia for a concert, and that's when I managed to interview Mick Box. Ken Hensley was actually, we never met. It was virtually, and quite sadly, soon after the second interview came out, he died during the COVID era.
I see. Would you say that he's one of the underrated keyboardists and a songwriter as well? Because he was one of the main songwriters for Uriah Heep. And from what I understand, Uriah Heep has fantastic lyrics. They tell a lot of stories. As compared to Rick Lakeman and John Law, who are more popular. How would you rate Ken Hensley as far as your listening is concerned? It's just an opinion.
Yes. Interestingly, I asked him about it. How do you rate yourself compared to John Lord and Rick Wakeman? So he himself said, which is something that I agree with, those people they're classically trained and technically more proficient than Ken Hensley. But Ken Hensley is more about the songwriting experience. He writes a lot of lyrics, which the other two don't. And even though he may not have as many flashy solos as those two, and as well as Keith Emerson and Tony Banks, he actually has a greater strength in terms of writing songs. And when it comes to writing songs, it's not just about the chords and melodies, but also about setting the scene as a lyricist. So in that sense, he was probably the most influential songwriter that I've encountered.
And Martin, when I listen to your vocal, it sounds very close to Jethro Tull. Any reason for sounding like that, or is that a natural way to sing?
That's also interesting that you told me that, because that is Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull is the person I've been compared to the most by people who listen to my music. I didn't think of it specifically, However, in my first few years of music, I wasn't singing at all. I was actually just playing the keyboard in rock bands. And then when I started trying to be a vocalist, it was at a time when I was listening to a lot of Jethro Tull albums, and I noticed that his range is a bit similar to mine. He's not, for example, I admire Robert Plant and Ian Gillan, but they have a much higher range. They're much more powerful singers actually than Ian Anderson. But he has a lot of personality and character and very interesting lyrics. So I went towards that direction.
Right, right. And what about, can you say something about Jimi Hendrix? I mean, the fact that you write a lot about music, you listen to music. Do you have anything to say about Hendrix?
Yes, I think Jimi Hendrix revolutionized guitar playing and its impact, because he just came and he was actually only really famous and really very present for 3 to 4 years, from the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967 until his death in 1970. During that time, he released 3 groundbreaking albums: Are You Experienced, Bold as Love, and Electric Ladyland. So it was a confluence of time. It was during the Vietnam War, during the sexual revolution, civil rights movement, and at the same time there were technological improvements in music as well, with multi-track recording. And Jimi Hendrix just had this brilliant talent, mercurial talent, and he was able to capture the times, and in a way that very few people could.
What about your opinion on Frank Zappa?
I have maybe the first 14 or 15 Frank Zappa albums, and he is a very interesting artist, although I probably don't return to him as much as I do some of the others. I probably started listening to Zappa a little bit later. I was around 25 when I got my first Frank Zappa album, so he isn't someone I grew up with. And hence, while I admire, for example, Hot Rats, Waka Jawaka, and The Grand Wazoo are my 3 favorite Frank Zappa albums, but I don't listen to it as often as I do many other bands.
So, Martin, let me ask you another opinion from you. What is your 10 favorite albums? I mean, it doesn't mean the best, it's just an opinion. What would you say?
Wow, that's
You've
quite
written 101.
Yes.
So can you list out
That's
10?
quite a challenge.
Oh.
Okay, so right now, Genesis Selling England by the Pound is really one that's very influential for me. This is when Peter Gabriel was the lead singer, not Phil Collins, and it's the height of progressive rock. It's a really superb album. Again, I managed to interview 2 members who played on it, Phil Collins and Steve Hackett. Queen's second album, Queen 2, is also very influential, because I first heard it in the mid-80s when pop music was a bit more bland, and suddenly I heard first Bohemian Rhapsody and then this classic early Queen album, and I realized how creative rock music could be. Then I think nothing would have happened without Beatles. Beatles' double salvo of Sgt. Pepper's and Magical Mystery Tour is, for me, it's the height of artistic expression in music. And those 2 albums go together for me. Really, Paul, John, George, and Ringo were just creating marvelous music that changed the world as far as I was concerned. There's so many different styles. I would have to say Bob Marley's Catch a Fire was a seminal reggae album. I also find Marvin Gaye's What's Going On a very important album for its socio-political influence. There are many people. Suzanne Vega is my favorite female artist, and I was very influenced by her second album, Solitude Standing. I would also say Uriah Heep's Salisbury is an album which has many different styles, including a 16-minute title track as well as an acoustic number, Lady in Black. So offhand, Deep Purple is also a very influential band, and I love the album Machine Head. So yeah, those are some of the critical albums.
Okay, great. That's very interesting. Well, you really have got wide range of experience as far as interviewing musicians and artists and band members and so on. And like you said, your huge collection and listening to all this music over the years. Now that you're already doing your own albums, right? Can you just tell me some of the issues or some difficulties that you face? At the same time, what is the fun part? Which is the most interesting thing?
Okay. Firstly, same thing happened with both my books and my albums. Actually, in the last 5 to 6 years, I've produced all four of those albums as well as the three books. However, there was a gestation period of over 25 years. For example, many of the songs that I'm recording and releasing now were actually written when I was a teenager.
Wow.
So it was actually then, yeah.
It's a long journey.
Yes, it is. So
But
it's
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
The creative process takes time.
Yeah.
You know,
Actually,
so-
yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it was because of the creative process, but because I didn't have the opportunities to record like I wanted to.
Sure, sure.
Over time, technology has changed, and a few years ago, I realized that if I didn't really buckle down and get down to it, I was going to leave behind a lifetime's worth of half-finished ideas. I didn't really want to have so many projects that were just standing by. And that really was the case. I had a 20% of one book, 6 tracks recorded for one album, and then I would move on to another project. So this kept happening.
Right.
And suddenly, around about 2017, 2018, I said to myself, I really have to focus and turn all these half-finished projects into completed works.
Okay. So what was the fun?
Well, the fun was, especially the music, playing with many of my good friends and having them on board, getting... so what happens quite often is I have a framework for a song, but I would leave for example, a violin solo or a bass part to a fellow musician.
Right.
So the biggest fun was to see what they would do with the framework of my song.
Okay. So that's great, Martin. You covered a little bit about your book and a little bit about your music, and a bit of your background, journalism, and so on. So thank you very much, Martin. You have certainly given us an insight into your books, your journey in music, as well as journalism. Not many people whom I know are involved in three different fields, and I'll put it all into the subject of creativity and so on. And at the present moment, which is very important, can you give us something positive about the world? There's a lot of negative stuff out there. Can you say a few positive things of your outlook?
Okay. Well, I do look at it this way. Many people say, for example, the music that I listen to is largely from the 60s and 70s. And people say, oh, I wish I was born in that era. I never have that feeling. Even though I'm fascinated by history and the time of the Russian Revolution and the 1960s, I actually still feel that potential begins with today and tomorrow. So even though there is reason to be a little bit pessimistic about, for example, the influence of extremism, the involvement of, basically right now, right-wing politics from Trump to Iran to military dictatorships that still exist in Myanmar, that can be very depressing because a lot of people are suffering. At the same time, the battle is never ending. We can't give up. And it's one planet, and we really have to do the best. I see myself as having been very lucky. I grew up in 4 different continents, in a progressive middle-class household, and I believe that I have values that I'd like to share, and we can never give up. We have to keep fighting because it isn't over yet.
That's very positive. So thank you very much, Martin, once again.
Welcome.
And I look forward to welcoming you to this channel again soon. So that's it, Martin Vengadesan on opinions. Stay tuned to opinions, and we'll get more opinions from many others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodin.